Communications Officer David Park had attended enough diplomatic functions to know that the most dangerous part of any interspecies negotiation wasn't the formal discussions, it was the technology that made those discussions possible. The neutral station Kepler Haven hummed with the controlled chaos of 3 different civilizations trying to communicate through translation matrices that were one software glitch away from turning peaceful trade relations into "your mothers were hamsters." Park, Ambassador Williams called from across the diplomatic suite's main console area, "How confident are we in the primary communication array?" David looked up from his diagnostic display, noting the slight harmonic distortion that had been developing in the Altari translation protocols for the past 6 hours. "Confident enough for formal negotiations, but I'm seeing some drift in the emotional resonance frequencies that could cause misunderstandings if we don't recalibrate." Emotional resonance frequencies? Williams asked, though her expression suggested she was afraid to hear the answer. The Altari language includes psychic components that our standard translation software approximates through harmonic analysis, David explained, making notes about frequency patterns that seem to shift based on the speaker's emotional state. If the calibration drifts too far, we might accidentally translate "I'm interested in your trade proposal" as "I find your civilization personally offensive." Ambassador Williams looked at the main diplomatic chamber where Queen Lasara Nethys of the Altari Empire was reviewing trade documents with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected the lives of billions. The Queen's silver hair was arranged in the complex braided patterns that indicated her unmarried status, and her emerald eyes held the kind of intelligence that made diplomatic mistakes feel potentially catastrophic. "How long do we have before the drift becomes problematic?" Williams asked. "Maybe 4 hours, possibly less if the negotiations become emotionally intensive," David said, pulling up repair protocols for communication arrays that cost more than most planetary defense budgets. "I can run a recalibration during the lunch break, but if we have major system failure during formal discussions, we accidentally start an interstellar incident because our technology told the Altari Queen that humanity thinks she's ugly," Williams finished grimly. "Got it. Make the repairs your absolute priority." David nodded, though privately he was more concerned about the underlying pattern he was seeing in the harmonic drift. The distortion wasn't random, it showed signs of deliberate interference, as if someone was actively trying to sabotage the communication systems. But pointing out potential sabotage during delicate diplomatic negotiations seemed like a good way to create the exact kind of paranoia and mistrust that would derail the talks. 2 hours later, as the formal sessions broke for refreshments, David found himself alone in the diplomatic suite's communication center with technology that was definitely malfunctioning and possibly being sabotaged by parties unknown. The primary transmitter showed classic signs of component degradation, but the degradation patterns were too uniform to be natural wear and the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Interesting," he murmured, pulling up detailed diagnostic protocols that would allow him to trace the exact source of the harmonic drift. "Someone really doesn't want these negotiations to succeed." The work required complete concentration as David traced signal pathways through technology that combined human engineering with Altari psychic amplification systems and neutral station diplomatic protocols. Each component had to be tested individually, then verified in context with the overall system, then cross-referenced against the emotional baseline patterns that allowed for accurate translation of Altari communications. He was so focused on isolating the source of interference that he didn't notice Queen Lasara entering the communication center until her voice cut through his concentration like a silver blade through silk. "Officer Park, I trust the communication systems are functioning adequately." David looked up from the transmitter assembly to find himself approximately 3 feet away from the most powerful political figure in this sector of the galaxy, a woman whose decision-making abilities were legendary and whose unmarried status had been the subject of diplomatic speculation for over a decade. "Your Majesty," he said, immediately standing and offering the formal bow that human diplomatic protocol required for Altari royalty, "the systems are functional, but I'm implementing preventive maintenance to ensure optimal performance during tomorrow's formal negotiations." Queen Lasara moved closer to examine his work, her presence carrying the kind of controlled authority that made the air itself seem more attentive. "You work with unusual focus, Officer Park. Most technicians I have observed approach their duties with efficient competence, but you seem to be conversing with the equipment. David felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized she'd been watching him work. I find that complex systems respond better when you treat them as partners rather than tools, Your Majesty. The technology includes Althari psychic components that seem to function more reliably when approached with respect rather than pure technical manipulation. Fascinating, Queen Lasara said, settling into the chair beside his workstation with the fluid grace of someone who'd never encountered furniture that wasn't arranged for her comfort. You believe that technology responds to emotional approach? I believe that technology designed to translate emotional and psychic content requires technicians who understand that their emotional state affects system performance, David said, returning to his diagnostic work while trying not to think about the fact that he was having a casual conversation with interstellar royalty. The Althari components in particular seem to function optimally when the operator maintains calm, focused attention rather than frustrated efficiency. And you maintain calm, focused attention naturally? David paused in his component testing to consider the question. Usually, yes. I find repair work meditative. There's something satisfying about taking a complex problem, breaking it down into manageable pieces, and systematically addressing each issue until the whole system functions properly. An admirable approach to problem solving, Queen Lasara observed, watching his hands move through the transmitter's delicate calibration procedures with what appeared to be genuine interest. Do you apply similar methodology to other aspects of life? Most aspects, David admitted, carefully adjusting harmonic frequencies while monitoring Queen Lasara's presence through his peripheral vision. Relationships, career decisions, personal goals, they all benefit from patient analysis and systematic attention to important details. Including romantic relationships? David's hand stilled on the transmitter controls as he processed the unexpected direction of their conversation. Your Majesty, I'm not sure that's an appropriate topic for discussion between royalty and a commoner? Queen Lasara asked, her tone carrying amusement rather than offense. Officer Park, I am curious about human approaches to partnership formation. Your diplomatic briefings indicate that humans choose romantic partners based on compatibility and mutual affection rather than political advantage. That's generally accurate, David said, resuming his work on the transmitter while trying to understand why the Althari Queen was interested in human relationship customs. Though compatibility and mutual affection can be defined in many different ways. Explain. David found himself describing human concepts of romantic partnership while simultaneously troubleshooting communication equipment that was worth more than his annual salary. Humans typically seek partners who complement their strengths and weaknesses, who share similar values and life goals, and who provide emotional support during difficult circumstances. The idea is to find someone who makes you want to be a better person while accepting you as you currently are. And how does one identify such compatibility? Time, attention, and honest communication, David said, locating the source of harmonic interference in a component that showed clear signs of deliberate sabotage. You observe how someone responds to stress, how they treat people who can't benefit them, how they approach problems and make decisions. You look for patterns that suggest they would be a good partner for the specific challenges and opportunities you expect to face together. Queen Lasara was quiet for several minutes, watching David work with an intensity that suggested she was processing information that went beyond casual curiosity about human customs. Officer Park, she said finally, your diagnostic work suggests that our communication difficulties are not due to natural equipment degradation. No, Your Majesty, David confirmed, highlighting the sabotage evidence on his display. Someone has been deliberately introducing interference into the translation matrices. The pattern suggests they want the interference to look like human equipment failure rather than deliberate sabotage. Which would discredit human technological capabilities and undermine the trade negotiations, Queen Lasara concluded, her voice carrying the cool authority of someone accustomed to identifying and eliminating threats to her political objectives. Yes, Your Majesty. The question is whether the sabotage originates from someone who opposes human-Althari cooperation in general, or someone who specifically wants these particular negotiations to fail. Queen Lasara stood, moving to examine David's diagnostic data with the focused attention of someone whose survival had always depended on understanding the political implications of technical problems. "Officer Park," she said, her voice carrying a weight that suggested their conversation had shifted from diplomatic courtesy to something more significant, "I believe we may need to work together to ensure that tomorrow's negotiations proceed without technical difficulties." "I'm at your service, Your Majesty," David said, recognizing that his simple transmitter repair had just become something considerably more complex and potentially dangerous. "Excellent," Queen Lasara replied, and David caught something in her tone that suggested she'd just made a decision that would have implications far beyond communication system maintenance. "I believe this collaboration will prove quite illuminating." As David returned to his work, he found himself wondering why the Altari Queen's presence made the repair work feel less like routine maintenance and more like the beginning of something that would change his understanding of both technology and diplomacy. He had no idea that Queen Lasara was wondering the same thing about him. The next morning's sabotage investigation required David to work in closer proximity to Queen Lasara than any human had achieved in recorded diplomatic history, a fact that Ambassador Williams mentioned approximately every 15 minutes through increasingly strained communication updates. "Park," Williams's voice came through his earpiece with the controlled panic of someone watching interstellar relations balanced on the technical competence of a single communications officer. "Please remember that Queen Lasara is not just alien royalty, she's alien royalty whose choice of romantic partner will determine succession laws for the next century of Altari civilization." "Understood, Ambassador," David replied, though privately he was more concerned with tracing signal interference patterns than with royal succession policies. "We're making progress on identifying the sabotage source." What he didn't mention was that Queen Lasara had been asking increasingly personal questions about human customs while they worked, conversations that felt like casual cultural exchange but carried undertones that David's diplomatic training hadn't prepared him to interpret. "Officer Park," Queen Lasara said, settling beside him at the diagnostic station with movements that suggested she'd decided his workspace was now her preferred location on the entire station, "your approach to systematic problem-solving is quite different from Altari technical methods." "How so, Your Majesty?" David asked, running trace algorithms through communication pathways that showed deliberate modification rather than natural degradation. "Altari technology responds to psychic harmony and emotional resonance," Queen Lasara explained, watching his diagnostic work with the focused attention she usually reserved for matters of state. "Our technicians approach repairs through meditation and intuitive connection with the equipment's energy patterns." "That sounds remarkably efficient," David said, noting interference signals that seemed designed to activate during moments of high emotional intensity, exactly when accurate translation would be most critical. "Human technology requires more systematic analysis, but the Altari components in these communication arrays seem to respond well to combination approaches." "You mean they respond well to your particular combination of systematic analysis and, what would you call your emotional approach to the equipment?" David paused in his diagnostic work to consider the question. "Respectful patience, I suppose. I treat complex systems like partners in problem-solving rather than obstacles to overcome." "Partners," Queen Lasara repeated thoughtfully. "Officer Park, in Altari culture, the concept of partnership extends beyond professional collaboration into deeper forms of emotional and psychic connection." "I've read some of the cultural briefings," David said, though he suspected those briefings had focused more on diplomatic protocol than on personal relationships. "The Altari form life bonds based on psychic compatibility rather than political arrangement." "Correct. We believe that true partnership requires harmony of purpose, compatibility of temperament, and the ability to strengthen each other through mutual support rather than hierarchical dominance." David found himself wondering why Queen Lasara was explaining Altari relationship customs while they traced sabotage patterns through diplomatic communication equipment. "That sounds like a beautiful approach to building lasting partnerships, Your Majesty." "It is also," Queen Lasara said quietly, "quite rare to encounter individuals whose natural behavior patterns align with ideal partnership characteristics." Before David could ask what she meant by that observation, his diagnostic algorithms identified the sabotage source, a series of microtransmitters that had been installed in the communication array's psychic amplification circuits, devices designed to introduce emotional static during high-intensity diplomatic exchanges. "Your Majesty, I found the interference source," David announced, displaying the sabotage evidence on his main screen. "Someone has installed emotional disruption devices in the psychic translation components." Queen Lasara leaned closer to examine the evidence, her proximity making David acutely aware that Altari royalty apparently smelled like starlight and winter gardens. "These devices would cause mistranslation during moments of strong emotional content," she observed. "Exactly. Formal negotiations involve emotional undertones that the translation software reads to provide context and nuance," David explained. "If those undertones are disrupted, friendly proposals could be translated as threats, and diplomatic courtesy could sound like insults. Creating exactly the kind of misunderstandings that would justify terminating negotiations," Queen Lasara concluded. "Officer Park, can you determine who installed these devices?" David ran identification protocols through the microtransmitters, noting technical signatures that suggested the sabotage came from someone with intimate knowledge of both human and Altari technology. The installation technique suggests someone with high-level access to the communication systems, but the devices themselves are of mixed human-Altari manufacture, which could indicate cooperation between human and Altari saboteurs, or someone attempting to implicate both sides in the sabotage, Queen Lasara said, her voice carrying the analytical precision of someone accustomed to unraveling political conspiracies. As they worked together to remove the sabotage devices and restore proper communication function, David found himself impressed by Queen Lasara's technical knowledge and problem-solving approach. She might be royalty, but she was also clearly intelligent, competent, and capable of collaborative work that felt more like partnership than hierarchical cooperation. "Your Majesty," he said, carefully extracting the final interference device, "may I ask why you're personally involved in technical repair work? Surely royal responsibilities don't typically include hands-on equipment maintenance." "Typically, no," Queen Lasara agreed, monitoring his work with the kind of focused attention that made David feel like his technical competence was being evaluated for purposes beyond equipment repair. "However, these negotiations are critically important to Altari interests, and I prefer to understand all aspects of situations that affect my people's future." "That's admirable dedication to thoroughness," David observed, running final diagnostic checks to ensure the communication systems were functioning properly. "It is also," Queen Lasara said, her voice carrying undertones that David couldn't quite interpret, "personally motivated." "Personally motivated how?" "Officer Park, the Altari delegation includes individuals who oppose these negotiations on philosophical grounds. They believe that contact with human culture will contaminate Altari traditions and weaken our social structures." David felt a chill as he realized the implications. "You think the sabotage comes from within your own delegation?" "I think the sabotage comes from people who would rather see these negotiations fail than succeed," Queen Lasara said carefully. "Which could include extremists from either side." As if summoned by their conversation, the communication center's main door opened to admit Lord Theron, Queen Lasara's primary diplomatic advisor, whose expression suggested he discovered something unpleasant about the ongoing technical repairs. "Your Majesty," Lord Theron said, his voice carrying the controlled disapproval of someone who'd found his queen in circumstances that violated multiple protocols, "the Altari delegation is concerned about your extended collaboration with human technical personnel." "Lord Theron," Queen Lasara replied with the calm authority of someone accustomed to having her decisions questioned, "Officer Park has discovered evidence of sabotage in our communication systems. His expertise has been essential for identifying and eliminating threats to the negotiation process." "Yes, Your Majesty, but the appearance of such close cooperation with a human technician may create misunderstandings about your personal interests and political priorities." David felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees as he realized he'd inadvertently become part of a political situation that was significantly more complex than equipment maintenance. "Lord Theron," Queen Lasara said, her voice carrying warning undertones that made David glad he wasn't the target of her displeasure, "are you suggesting that my personal interactions should be limited by concerns about political perception?" I'm suggesting that Your Majesty's choice of companions has implications for Altari succession law and diplomatic credibility, Lord Theron replied, his gaze shifting to David with the kind of assessment that suggested he was being evaluated as a potential threat to established political order. Companions? David asked, feeling like he'd missed several important steps in the conversation. Queen Lysara turned to him with an expression that suggested she was making a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Officer Park, in Altari culture, when an unmarried queen spends significant time in close collaboration with a potential partner, such behavior is interpreted as indication of romantic interest. Romantic interest? David repeated, his brain performing the computational equivalent of a complete system crash. Yes, Queen Lysara said simply. And judging by your emotional responses during our collaboration, the interest appears to be mutual. David stared at her, trying to process the idea that his professional competence and respectful collaboration had been interpreted as courtship behavior by the most powerful political figure in this sector of the galaxy. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. Are you saying that working together on technical repairs has created a diplomatic incident involving Altari royal succession protocols? I'm saying, Queen Lysara replied, her emerald eyes holding his with an intensity that made his pulse rate spike in ways his medical monitoring equipment would definitely notice, that working together on technical repairs has demonstrated compatibility factors that Altari culture recognizes as indicators of ideal partnership potential. Lord Theron made a sound that suggested diplomatic catastrophe was imminent. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be considering a human for royal consort status. Lord Theron, Queen Lysara said, her voice carrying the kind of final authority that ended discussions rather than continued them, I am considering whatever options will best serve Altari interests and my personal judgment about optimal partnership choices. David found himself at the center of an interstellar diplomatic crisis that had somehow evolved from routine equipment maintenance, and the strangest part was that he wasn't entirely sure he minded the development. Your Majesty, he said quietly, what exactly does this mean for the negotiations tomorrow? It means, Queen Lysara replied, that we need to complete our investigation of the sabotage tonight, because tomorrow's negotiations will determine not just trade relations between our civilizations, but also whether our personal compatibility survives political scrutiny. As Lord Theron departed with the expression of someone planning urgent diplomatic damage control, David realized that his life had just become significantly more complicated, interesting, and potentially wonderful than he'd ever imagined possible. The sabotage investigation took on new urgency when David and Queen Lysara discovered that the interference devices were scheduled to activate during the next day's formal treaty signing, timed to cause maximum diplomatic damage at the moment when human-Altari cooperation would be officially established. The activation sequence is sophisticated, David said, analyzing the sabotage programming while trying not to think about the fact that Queen Lysara was sitting close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her presence. Whoever designed this wanted the communication failure to appear spontaneous and irreversible. Creating the impression that human-Altari cooperation is inherently unstable, Queen Lysara observed, her voice carrying the analytical precision of someone accustomed to identifying political threats. Officer Park, this level of technical sophistication suggests coordination between human and Altari saboteurs. Or someone with access to both technological traditions, David said, noting programming signatures that seemed deliberately designed to implicate both sides. Your Majesty, I'm seeing evidence that the sabotage was installed by someone with intimate knowledge of the negotiation schedule and security protocols. Someone within one of the official delegations, Queen Lysara concluded grimly. David, we may be investigating people who have been sitting across from us in formal negotiations while actively working to ensure those negotiations fail. David noted that Queen Lysara had dropped his formal title, a change that felt simultaneously intimate and politically significant. That raises the question of whether we can trust our own security protocols or diplomatic channels to investigate the sabotage. It also raises the question, Queen Lysara said quietly, of whether we can trust each other completely, or whether our collaboration itself is part of someone's manipulation strategy. David stopped working and looked directly at her, recognizing that their investigation had reached a point where personal trust would determine their ability to resolve the political crisis. Your Majesty, Lasara, I can't prove that my interest in you is genuine rather than calculated, but I can tell you that I've never experienced anything like the connection I feel when we work together. Explain. When we collaborate on technical problems, it feels like we're thinking with shared intelligence, David said, setting aside his diagnostic equipment to give her his complete attention. Your insights enhance my analytical capabilities, my systematic approach provides structure for your intuitive knowledge, and together we solve problems that neither of us could address alone. And personally? Queen Lasara asked, her emerald eyes holding his with an intensity that made the rest of the universe feel temporarily irrelevant. Personally, I find myself looking forward to your questions, your observations, your presence, David admitted. I enjoy explaining technical concepts because you ask the kind of questions that help me understand my own knowledge better. I like the way you approach problems with confidence and creativity. I appreciate how you treat me as an intellectual equal despite the vast difference in our social positions. David, Queen Lasara said softly, in Alt-Hari culture, the feelings you're describing are recognized as indicators of life bond compatibility. And what do you feel when we work together? David asked. I feel like I've found someone who sees my intelligence as an asset rather than a threat, someone who treats my authority with respect but doesn't defer to it when expertise suggests better solutions, Queen Lasara replied. I feel like I've found someone whose presence calms my mind while simultaneously challenging me to think more clearly. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside the communication center, multiple people moving with the purposeful stride that suggested official business rather than casual passage. We have company, David said, checking his security displays to identify the approaching group. Lord Theron and 3 members of the Alt-Hari delegation, Queen Lasara identified, her voice shifting from personal warmth to political alertness. David, they're probably here to discuss the political implications of our collaboration. Or to separate us before we can complete the sabotage investigation, David suggested, noting that the approaching group included Lord Varen, the Alt-Hari delegate who had been most vocal in his opposition to human-Althari cooperation. The communication center's door opened to admit exactly the group Queen Lasara had predicted, their expressions ranging from concern to disapproving to actively hostile. Your Majesty, Lord Theron said with the careful formality of someone delivering unpleasant news, the Alt-Hari delegation has voted to request your immediate withdrawal from collaboration with human technical personnel. On what grounds? Queen Lasara asked, her voice carrying the dangerous calm that David was learning to recognize as a warning sign. On the grounds that extended personal interaction with a human technician creates inappropriate emotional attachment that compromises your judgment regarding the broader political implications of these negotiations, Lord Varen said, his tone suggesting he viewed David as a contaminating influence on royal decision-making. Lord Varen, Queen Lasara replied, rising from her chair with the fluid grace that made her presence feel larger and more commanding, are you suggesting that my personal relationships should be subject to committee approval? I'm suggesting that Your Majesty's personal relationships affect Alt-Hari succession law, diplomatic credibility, and the stability of our entire political system, Lord Varen replied. Choosing a human consort would create constitutional crisis and undermine centuries of Alt-Hari cultural tradition. David felt the weight of interstellar politics settling around him like a suffocating blanket as he realized that his growing feelings for Queen Lasara had implications that extended far beyond personal happiness into the realm of constitutional law and cultural survival. Lord Varen, he said quietly, I understand your concerns about cultural stability, but I think there's something more immediate that requires attention. Which is? Lord Varen asked with the dismissive tone of someone who didn't expect useful contributions from human technicians. The sabotage investigation has revealed that someone within the official delegations has been working to ensure these negotiations fail, David said, activating his diagnostic displays to show the evidence they discovered. The timing and sophistication suggest coordination between extremist factions who prefer conflict to cooperation. The Alt-Hari delegates examined David's evidence with growing alarm as they recognized the implications of the sabotage programming. This would have caused complete communication failure during tomorrow's treaty signing, Lord Theron observed, his political calculations clearly shifting as he realized the sabotage threatened Altari interests regardless of cultural concerns about human influence. Yes, Queen Lysara said, and Officer Park's technical expertise has been essential for identifying and neutralizing the threat. His collaboration has protected Altari interests more effectively than traditional security protocols. Nevertheless, Lord Varen said, though his tone carried less certainty than before, the political implications of Your Majesty's personal attachment to a human remain problematic. The political implications of allowing saboteurs to derail beneficial negotiations are considerably more problematic, Queen Lysara replied. Lord Varen, do you oppose these negotiations on their merits, or do you oppose them because you prefer isolation to the challenges of cultural adaptation? I oppose them because I believe Altari culture is superior to human culture and should not be contaminated by alien influences, Lord Varen said, his voice carrying the conviction of someone whose beliefs had hardened into ideology. Including the alien influence that just saved these negotiations from sabotage? Queen Lysara asked pointedly. Your Majesty, David said quietly, I think Lord Varen may have just told us who's behind the sabotage attempts. The temperature in the communication center seemed to drop several degrees as everyone processed the implications of David's observation. Lord Varen's expression shifted from defensive to defensive with undertones of panic. You're accusing me of treason based on philosophical disagreement? Lord Varen demanded. I'm observing that your stated beliefs align perfectly with the motivations behind the sabotage, David replied calmly, and that your reaction to being questioned suggests guilt rather than innocent indignation. Queen Lysara moved to stand beside David, her positioning suggesting partnership rather than hierarchical protection. Lord Varen, submit to psychic examination or be removed from the delegation immediately. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious about allowing a human technician to influence official security decisions, Lord Varen protested. I'm serious about protecting Altari interests using the most effective methods available, Queen Lysara replied. David's analysis has proven more reliable than traditional security protocols. Lord Varen looked around the room at faces that no longer showed support for his position, then made the kind of decision that desperate people make when they realize their carefully laid plans are unraveling. Your Majesty, he said with the formal precision of someone delivering an ultimatum, choose between your human attachment and your responsibilities to Altari culture. You cannot have both. Queen Lysara was quiet for a moment, considering options that would determine not just her personal happiness but the future of her civilization's relationship with humanity. Lord Varen, she said finally, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone whose decisions were final, I choose both. David Park represents the best qualities of human culture. Intelligence, integrity, collaborative problem-solving, and respect for others regardless of social position. If those qualities contaminate Altari culture, then we will be stronger for the contamination. And if the people refuse to accept a human consort, then the people will learn that their queen values competence, character, and emotional compatibility over xenophobic prejudice, Queen Lysara replied. David, are you willing to accept the challenges that come with partnership with someone whose personal choices affect interstellar politics? David looked at the most remarkable woman he'd ever met, someone who was offering him not just love but a life that would involve constant political scrutiny and cultural adaptation, and realized that the technical repair work that had brought them together was nothing compared to the complex systems they would need to build together. Lysara, he said, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than spend my life solving complicated problems with you. Excellent, Queen Lysara replied, then turned to address the Altari delegation with the voice of someone making official royal proclamations. Lord Theron, arrange for Lord Varen's immediate detention and interrogation regarding his involvement in the sabotage attempts. Lord Kale, coordinate with human security to ensure tomorrow's negotiations proceed without further interference. Your Majesty, Lord Theron said carefully, what should I tell the delegation about your personal announcement? Tell them that their queen has chosen a consort who has proven his worth through service to Altari interests, Queen Lysara said, her hand finding David's with the natural ease of someone who'd already decided that partnership was more important than politics. Tell them that cultural strength comes from adopting the best qualities of other civilizations, not from rigid adherence to traditions that prevent growth. Lord Varen made one final attempt to salvage his position. Your Majesty, the people will never accept this violation of cultural purity. The people will accept what their queen determines is best for their future, Queen Lasara replied with finality. And anyone who cannot accept that decision is welcome to find employment elsewhere in the galaxy. As the Altari delegation departed to implement security measures and damage control, David found himself alone with Queen Lasara in the communications center where their relationship had developed from professional collaboration into something that would reshape interstellar politics. Lasara, he said quietly, are you certain about this decision? I don't want you to sacrifice your political position for personal happiness. David, she replied, turning to face him with the smile he was beginning to recognize as reserved exclusively for him, I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing the future over the past, growth over stagnation, and partnership over isolation. Those are good choices for a queen to make. Even if those choices involve marrying a human communications officer. Especially if those choices involve marrying a human communications officer who has proven himself capable of solving problems that threaten my people's welfare, Queen Lasara said, her emerald eyes holding his with an intensity that made his pulse race. David, tomorrow's negotiations will establish the foundation for decades of human-Altari cooperation. I can't think of a better symbol for that cooperation than a royal marriage that demonstrates the benefits of combining our civilization's best qualities. David pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt to hold someone whose decisions affected the lives of billions and whose presence made him feel like he could solve any technical problem the universe presented. In that case, he said, I suppose I should learn proper Altari courtship protocols. David, Queen Lasara said, her voice carrying laughter and affection and political satisfaction in equal measure, you've been following proper Altari courtship protocols since the moment you started treating complex technology as a partner rather than a tool. We value competence, respect, collaborative problem solving, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. You've demonstrated all of those qualities. What about the formal ceremony requirements? We'll incorporate both human and Altari traditions, Queen Lasara said practically. Political marriages require political ceremony, but personal relationships require personal meaning. We'll make sure our wedding serves both purposes. As they returned to completing the communication system repairs that would ensure tomorrow's treaty signing proceeded without sabotage, David realized that his life had transformed from routine technical work into the kind of partnership that would require constant adaptation, creative problem solving, and the willingness to build something unprecedented together. Lasara, he said, making final adjustments to ensure optimal system performance, what happens after tomorrow? Do I become a diplomatic consort with formal political responsibilities? You become whatever kind of partner serves our relationship and our people's interests best, Queen Lasara replied, monitoring his work with the attention to detail that had first attracted her to his problem-solving approach. Technical advisor, cultural liaison, royal consort, co-ruler, we'll figure out titles later. The important thing is that we'll be figuring them out together. Together, David repeated, testing the word as he tested equipment, carefully, thoroughly, with attention to how all the components would function as an integrated system. Together, Queen Lasara confirmed, and David realized that the most complex technical challenge he'd ever undertaken would be building a life that successfully integrated two different civilizations, two different sets of expectations, and two people who discovered that the best solutions often came from collaboration between minds that approached problems from completely different perspectives. The formal treaty signing proceeded with the kind of flawless technical precision that made David's reputation as a communications specialist, though he suspected most of the assembled diplomats were more interested in the political drama surrounding Queen Lasara's unexpected choice of consort than in the actual trade agreements being negotiated. Communications functioning at optimal parameters, David reported to Ambassador Williams through his earpiece, monitoring translation matrices that were finally free of sabotage interference. All psychic resonance frequencies are stable, emotional undertones are translating accurately, and we have full diplomatic protocol compatibility. Excellent work, Park, Williams replied, though her tone suggested she was still processing the news that her communications officer had become engaged to alien royalty overnight. Any concerns about the political atmosphere affecting technical performance? David glanced across the formal assembly hall where Queen Lasara sat with the regal composure of someone whose personal decisions had become matters of interstellar diplomatic significance. She'd been fielding questions from both delegations about her choice of human consort with the patience of someone accustomed to having her judgment questioned and the confidence of someone whose decisions were ultimately non-negotiable. "No technical concerns," David said. "Though I think everyone's more interested in royal romance than in rare mineral trading rights." "Can't imagine why," Williams said dryly. "It's not every day that diplomatic history gets rewritten because a communications officer knows how to fix transmitters." The formal ceremonies proceeded through the elaborate protocols required for interstellar treaty establishment, with representatives from both civilizations delivering speeches about cooperation, mutual benefit, and the historic significance of human-Althari alliance. David monitored the proceedings while simultaneously running final diagnostic checks on all communication systems, ensuring that no sabotage remnants could interfere with the official treaty documentation. "Officer Park," came Lord Theron's voice through the Althari communication channel, "Her Majesty requests your presence at the ceremonial platform for the final treaty signing." David looked at Ambassador Williams, who nodded with the expression of someone who decided that unprecedented diplomatic situations required flexible responses to protocol violations. "Go," she said. "Make history. Try not to accidentally start any wars." David made his way through the assembled dignitaries toward the ceremonial platform where Queen Lasara waited beside the holographic treaty displays that would formalize decades of interspecies cooperation. The assembled crowd watched his approach with the kind of fascination usually reserved for exotic fauna or impending natural disasters. "David," Queen Lasara said as he reached the platform, her voice carrying both personal warmth and official authority, "please stand beside me for the treaty signing. Your technical expertise has been essential for ensuring these negotiations could proceed successfully." "Your Majesty," David replied formally, though he suspected protocol had long since given way to improvised diplomatic theater, "I'm honored to participate in this historic ceremony." What happened next would be remembered in diplomatic histories as either the most romantic moment in interstellar relations or the most politically significant breach of royal protocol in Althari civilization, depending on who was telling the story. As Queen Lasara activated the holographic treaty displays and prepared to add her formal signature to the human-Althari trade agreements, she paused to look directly at David with an expression that suggested she was about to make another announcement that would reshape interstellar politics. "Before I sign these treaties," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall's amplification systems, "I want to make an additional declaration that will ensure the strength and permanence of human-Althari cooperation." The assembled diplomats leaned forward with the attention of people who recognized that they were witnessing the kind of moment that changed the course of civilizations. "I, Queen Lasara Nethys of the Althari Empire, formally declare my intention to bond with David Park of Earth, who has proven himself worthy of partnership through service to Althari interests and demonstration of the collaborative values that will guide our civilizations toward mutual prosperity." The assembly hall erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and what sounded like several diplomatic incidents occurring simultaneously in multiple languages. David felt his face heating as he realized that Queen Lasara had just announced their engagement to the assembled representatives of two interstellar civilizations, making their personal relationship a matter of official diplomatic record. "Lasara," he said quietly, "are you certain this is the appropriate moment for personal announcements?" "David," she replied, her emerald eyes sparkling with amusement and determination, "there is no better moment to demonstrate the strength of human-Althari partnership than by showing that our civilizations can create bonds that transcend species barriers." She turned to address the assembled crowd with the authority of someone whose words would be quoted in diplomatic textbooks for centuries. "The man standing beside me has shown that human intelligence, integrity, and collaborative problem-solving can serve Althari interests as effectively as our own traditional approaches. He has demonstrated that cultural cooperation creates strength rather than weakness." Queen Lasara paused, her gaze sweeping across faces that represented the political leadership of two civilizations. David Park will serve as my consort and as a bridge between our peoples, proving that the best solutions often come from combining different perspectives, different skills, and different approaches to common challenges. She gestured toward David with a movement that managed to be both regal and affectionate. He is too careful for a soldier, too thoughtful for a politician, and too honest for a traditional diplomat. He is exactly what both our civilizations need as we learn to work together toward mutual prosperity. And, she added, her voice shifting from official proclamation to personal declaration that somehow carried even more authority, he is the man I love. The assembly hall fell silent as diplomats processed the implications of a royal love declaration that had just become part of official treaty negotiations. David realized that everyone was waiting for his response to what was simultaneously a personal proposal and a political statement that would affect interstellar relations for decades. Your Majesty, he said, projecting his voice clearly enough to address the entire assembly, I accept your proposal of partnership in all its implications, personal, political, and diplomatic. Even though partnership with me means constant political scrutiny, cultural adaptation challenges, and the responsibility of representing human interests in Altari society? Queen Lysara asked. Especially because partnership with you means the opportunity to build something unprecedented together, David replied. Lysara, I can't think of anything more worthwhile than spending my life solving complicated problems with the most remarkable person I've ever met. Queen Lysara's smile could have powered the station's main generators as she moved to stand directly beside David, their positioning suggesting partnership rather than hierarchy. In that case, she said, activating the holographic treaty displays, let's make this official. The treaty signing became a dual ceremony as Queen Lysara simultaneously formalized human Altari trade agreements and announced the engagement that would create the first interspecies royal marriage in diplomatic history. David found himself signing documents that established both interstellar cooperation protocols and his own transition from communications officer to royal consort. David, Queen Lysara said as the ceremonies concluded and the assembled diplomats began the complex process of processing unprecedented political developments, do you have any regrets about how dramatically your life has changed? David looked around the assembly hall where representatives of two civilizations were celebrating both successful negotiations and royal romance, then at the remarkable woman whose presence had transformed routine technical work into the foundation for a life he couldn't have imagined. My only regret, he said, is that I didn't meet you sooner. We have plenty of time to make up for that, Queen Lysara replied, her hand finding his with the natural ease of someone who'd already decided that partnership was the best approach to whatever challenges the universe might present. 6 months later, David stood in the newly constructed Joint Communications Center on Kepler Haven, monitoring translation systems that had become the model for interspecies diplomatic technology throughout the galaxy. The sabotage investigation had led to significant improvements in security protocols, while his marriage to Queen Lysara had created new opportunities for cultural exchange that neither civilization had previously imagined. Any technical difficulties with today's negotiations? Queen Lysara asked, entering the communication center with the easy familiarity of someone whose workspace had become a shared space. No technical difficulties, David replied, though I think the Centaurian delegation is still adjusting to the concept of royal marriages based on love rather than political arrangement. They'll adapt, Queen Lysara said practically, settling beside him to review communication logs with the collaborative attention to detail that had first attracted her to his problem-solving approach. Cultural evolution takes time, but it's inevitable when people see better alternatives to traditional methods. Speaking of cultural evolution, David said, activating displays that showed communication traffic between human and Altari colonies throughout the sector, the integration protocols we developed are being adopted by other interspecies diplomatic initiatives. Excellent, Queen Lysara said, noting how their combined human-Altari communication methods had improved translation accuracy and reduced diplomatic misunderstandings. David, I believe we've successfully proven that collaboration creates better results than isolation. Both personally and professionally, David agreed, watching data streams that represented the growing network of cooperation between civilizations that had learned to combine their best qualities rather than defending their separate traditions. Any regrets about becoming a royal consort whose primary responsibility is fixing transmitters and translating diplomatic nuances? Queen Lysara asked. David looked at the woman who transformed his life through the simple act of recognizing that his technical competence reflected qualities that made him ideal partnership material, then at the communication systems that connected civilizations learning to work together rather than against each other. Lysara, he said, I can't think of anything more satisfying than building systems that help people understand each other better. Especially when I get to do it with you. In that case, Queen Lysara said, activating new diplomatic protocols that would extend their communication innovations to recently contacted civilizations throughout the galaxy, let's see how many more problems we can solve together. And as they worked side by side, monitoring the flows of information that connected stars and civilizations in an ever-expanding network of cooperation, David reflected that the most important technical repair he'd ever completed was fixing the communication barriers between himself and the remarkable woman who'd seen past cultural differences to recognize that the best partnerships were built on mutual respect, shared goals, and the willingness to approach complex problems with patience, intelligence, and collaborative attention to detail. The transmitter that had brought them together still hummed with perfect efficiency in the corner of their workspace, a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from dramatic revelations, but from the quiet recognition that two people working together could accomplish more than either could achieve alone.